participate because an event has taken place that fundamentally changes the terms of the debate on Puerto Rico's political status. On November 6, 2012, Puerto Rico exercised its right to self-determination by holding a free and fair vote on the status question. The results demonstrate that 54% of voters do not wish to maintain the current status. To the extent that the people of Puerto Rico ever gave their consent to the current status, that consent has now been withdrawn. The results further demonstrate that among the three internationally recognized alternatives to the current status, 61% of voters support statehood. Finally, the results demonstrate that for the first time in Puerto Rico's history, there are more people who want Puerto Rico to become a state than who want to continue the current status. I have described the significance of this vote to the President of the United States, my colleagues in the US Congress, and the American public, and I believe it is appropriate for me to inform the community of nations as well. I am honored to speak on behalf of those men and women who proudly carry the Puerto Rican flag in one hand and the American flag in the other, and who know that their law for Puerto Rico and their law for the United States complement rather than contradict one another. Our party believes that statehood is in the best interest of Puerto Rico, and so we seek to perfect our union with the United States, not to dilute or dissolve the political, economic, and social bonds that we have forged in peace and in war over the past 115 years. As the November vote reveals, the statehood movement has become the predominant force in Puerto Rico, and it grows stronger by the day. I want to clarify an important point. On the surface, those who want Puerto Rico to become a state and those who want Puerto Rico to become a sovereign nation appear to have little in common, given our different visions for Puerto Rico's future. But we actually agree in fundamental respects. We are the reality-based movements in Puerto Rico. We recognize, rather than refute, the fact that Puerto Rico is an unincorporated territory of the United States. We understand, rather than deny, that although the United States approved a constitution for Puerto Rico in 1952 and was released from its reporting requirement under Article 73 of the UN Charter in 1953, Puerto Rico is still a non-self-governing territory, if that term has any meaning at all. We recognize that under US law and international law, as enshrined in the UN General Assembly Resolution 1541, there are three status options that would provide Puerto Rico with a full measure of self-government: independence, nationhood in a free association with another nation, and integration through statehood. We do not misrepresent what Puerto Rico is or what it might become for the sake of political advantage. We recognize that Puerto Rico remains an unincorporated territory of the United States, despite the fact it has been allowed by the US Congress to exercise authority over its local affairs similar to that which the US states are entitled. We likewise recognize that the US Congress could unilaterally rescind the powers it has delegated to Puerto Rico if it saw fit to do so. We recognize as self-evident that Puerto Rico does not have democracy or equality at the national level. The United States government makes and implements laws for Puerto Rico, but island residents cannot vote for the US president, are not represented in the US Senate, and elect one member to the US House of Representatives, the resident commissioner, who can vote in committees, but not in the full House. Moreover, the laws enacted by Congress and enforced by the presidency may and often do treat Puerto Rico unequally. As resident commissioner, I regularly experience firsthand the injustice of our current status. I must fight to ensure that Puerto Rico is not excluded from job creation, health care, or border security bills that automatically include the states. As my fellow representatives in the US House vote on legislation that affects every aspect of life in Puerto Rico, I can only watch, even though I represent about 5 times as many US citizens as any of my colleagues. I must rely on the goodwill of US senators who were elected to protect the interest of their constituents, not mine. And naturally, such goodwill is not always forthcoming. And I must request assistance from a president who, however strong his affinity for Puerto Rico might be, is not required to seek or earn our vote. To expect that his administration would feel the same urgency to produce positive results for Puerto Rico as it does for the states is frankly to substitute hope for experience. Furthermore, those who want Puerto Rico to become a state and those who want Puerto Rico to become a sovereign nation, whether in a free association with or fully independent from the United States, all recognize that Puerto Rico's territory status is the root cause of the economic and social problems that impair quality of life on the island. We categorically reject the backwards view embraced by certain political leaders in Puerto Rico that the status debate is somehow a distraction from efforts to address these challenges. Finally, and above all, estadistas, soberanistas, y independentistas share a deep conviction that the people of Puerto Rico, 3.7 million strong, deserve a fully democratic and dignified status. In November, Puerto Rico took the initiative, exercised its right to self-determination, and unequivocally withdrew its consent to the current territory status. This means that the current status has lost its democratic legitimacy. The only path forward is statehood or nationhood. And between those options, the people of Puerto Rico clearly prefer integration through statehood. It is now incumbent upon the United States government to respond by enacting legislation to offer Puerto Rico one or more of the status options that would provide its people with a full measure of self-government. As a legal matter, the U.S. Constitution vests Congress with broad authority over its territories. For Puerto Rico to evolve and to become a state or sovereign nation, it is not enough to just seek such a change. U.S. Congress and the President must act to enable that change. As a moral matter, the U.S. government rightfully prides itself as a champion of democracy and self-determination around the world. Therefore, it should, indeed, it must adhere to those principles with respect to its own citizens, or it will lose credibility at home and abroad. I have faith that the U.S. government will fulfill its legal and moral obligation to facilitate Puerto Rico's transition to a democratic and dignified status. But my faith is not blind. Meaningful action from Washington will be required to sustain it. I am fully cognizant that the wheels of government often take longer to turn than one might prefer, and I therefore appreciate that a degree of patience is in order. But I also know that justice too long is justice denied. And after 115 years as a territory, Puerto Rico's patience is understandably running out. Let me be clear, Mr. Chairman, before I conclude. In the absence of concrete and timely action from the U.S. government, I will not hesitate to raise this case before the United Nations or any other appropriate international forum. As the leader of a party that aspires for Puerto Rico to become a full and equal member of the American family, I have no desire to publicly criticize the United States, but it's more important for me to secure justice for my people than it is for me to be polite. In closing, I want to express my belief that the international community, like the U.S. government, should honor the will of the people of the non-self-governing territory of Puerto Rico. Consistent with the UN Charter and Resolution 1541, the international community should support a process of self-determination that will result in a fully democratic and dignified status for Puerto Rico, whether that status be statehood or nationhood. The principle of self-determination so requires. Thank you.